Welcome to Canadian Passages, a project that brings history to life with audio versions of archival material. These audiograms use digital voices to make historical writings accessible anytime, anywhere. The materials in this series come from the archives of the Canadian Forces Base Esquimalt, Naval and Military Museum. Please be warned that this content may contain language considered inappropriate by today's standards. The material is a product of its time and represents the context of the era, as well as the attitudes and opinions of those who created it. In the interests of historical integrity, editing has been done for clarity or brevity only, rather than for censorship. Patrick Willett Brock, or PWB, was born December 30, 1902, in Kingston, Ontario. He and his family moved to Vancouver in 1911 when his father became a professor at the University of British Columbia. In 1917, at age 14, PWB enrolled in Canada's Royal Naval College, and moved into the Royal Canadian Navy in 1920 as a midshipman. With the downsizing of Canada's naval service in 1921, he was forced to transfer to the Royal Navy, where he was nicknamed Canada Brock. Over the next 4 decades, he rose to Rear Admiral, one of only a few Canadians to achieve that rank. A prominent member of the naval community during his life, Rear Admiral Brock has been largely forgotten since his death in 1988. PWB was an avid writer throughout his life, and a collection of his letters, essays, and diaries are in the archives of the CFB Esquimalt Museum. These writings include first-hand accounts of major events of the 20th century, as well as the routine life of a Navy officer. PWB served the first few years of his naval career in the Mediterranean, and then in 1925 he applied for a transfer to China. Heightened activity on the Royal Navy's China station at the time was in response to the breakdown of the treaty port system under surging Chinese nationalism. To protect British trade, citizens, and vast commercial holdings in China, Great Britain carried out gunboat diplomacy, the implicit or explicit threat of naval force to ensure political compliance and protect economic privileges. PWB received his orders while he was visiting his family in Canada for Christmas, and traveled from Vancouver on the Canadian Pacific steamship, Empress of Australia. He was just 23 years old when he arrived in Shanghai and wrote the following to his brother, Byron Britton Brock, known in the family as Brit.
Palace Hotel, Shanghai, April 8, 1926. Dear Brit. Well, old thing, I have had to revise my plans, as you may have seen in the Dockyard Lyre. A few hours out of Shanghai, I got a wireless telegraphy message from the resident naval officer here to say that my appointment to Moorhen was changed to Vindictive, and that I was to wait for her here. The R&O very kindly arranged for my accommodation at this hotel. So me voici marking time for 4 days. The hotel is comfortable if it smacks of the boarding house, and I have a fine large room plus bath. Also a natty little corridor with swinging half-doors a la bar room, or lavatory. All the rooms have them, the object I suppose being to combine coolness and privacy in the hot weather. A chap called Pew Cook, number 1 of the Woodlark, is staying at the hotel while his ship is refitting, and he looked me up. I have been seeing the town under his auspices, quite respectable like. I expect I shall learn the language eventually. As might be expected from a naval officer, my first lesson commenced with gin, which in pidgin English is Jossman. Why? Well, the label of Coates' bottle has a picture of a monk on it. Neat but not too obvious. I can see the days coming when I shall call lunch tiffin. I shall struggle against it, but what can one chap do against the world?
George Garnet Pew Cook was born in England in 1902 and served as first officer with the rank of lieutenant on HMS Woodlark in 1926. Pew Cook eventually reached the rank of lieutenant commander and retired before the Second World War, but he was in the 1944 Navy list as acting commander. HMS Woodlark was a shallow-draft river gunboat, a vessel specifically engineered for the Yangtze River. When he left for China, PWB was expecting to serve on HMS Moorhen, also a river gunboat. But he was reassigned to HMS Vindictive. By 1926, Vindictive had been rebuilt twice and moved to the China station, as a cruiser with a complement of more than 700, including 37 officers. The Dockyard Lyre was almost certainly a disparaging nickname that could have referred to any number of publications that reported Navy appointments. The term Josman is rooted in Jos, an old Pidgin English word for a Chinese god or idol, derived from the Portuguese dos, which means God. The Chinese must have associated the word with religion and thus connected it to the monk on the gin bottle label. The word tiffin was an Anglo-Indian word derived from the Old English tiffing, which meant to take a sip of liquor. In British India, the heavy midday meal popular in England was too much for the tropical heat. The British began taking a lighter meal at midday. They referred to this light repast as tiffing, implying it was just a sip. Over time, this evolved into the noun tiffin.
If the Navy list I looked at is not too old, Nixon is in the Vindictive. I hope he is, as I hate entering a mess as an utter stranger. Also, her number 1, the Honorable W.S. Carson, son of the Greater Ulster Fighting Lord, was number 1 of the Orion when we joined her in 1920. I don't know who else is in Vindictive, but she ought to be okay. Hugh Cook says if the West River gunboats are as good as the Yangtze, I am losing by the exchange. He swears by the life he has never had such a good time. His description of his refit here is very entertaining. They have had to remove every possible fitting as otherwise the Chinese will steal them. Not content with unscrewing things, they will cut them right out bodily. They have been known to lift the tip of a propeller blade for the sake of the brass. Cook says that, as usual in China, everything is reversed. Instead of his entertaining the refitting people, they entertain him. At home you get the jobs on your defect list done, but if you want to get extras, you have to exercise diplomacy, refreshment, etc. Here the extras are a gift, but the difficulty is to get your defect list attended to, and so on. Curious, isn't it? The Vindictive will probably be here until the end of May or thereabouts, as they are afraid of the possibility of an outbreak on the anniversary of last year's. Adios, old thing. Hope the exams are okay.
The W.S. Carson referred to in the letter was the Honorable Walter Seymour Carson, who, according to the Dreadnought Project website, was the second son of Lord Carson of Duncairn, Ireland. Carson served until 1939, retiring as a captain. Nixon was Francis Robert Woodcock Nixon, known as Jack, who was born in Duncan, British Columbia in 1904. Jack Nixon began at the Royal Naval College after its relocation to Esquimalt. While the commander of Canada's Royal Naval College at the time was Edward Atcherley Eckersall Nixon, there appears to have been no relation between the two. PWB's comment about HMS Orion, when we joined her in 1920, indicates that he and Nixon joined the ship together. Also, according to For Posterity's Sake, as well as the Canadian Navy list, Nixon did in fact serve on HMS Vindictive as a lieutenant from April 1925 until August 1927. Not only were the two men friends, but Brock was the best man at Nixon's wedding in Victoria in 1928. Nixon had a noteworthy career in the Royal Canadian Navy, including being paymaster at CFB Esquimalt. He was killed in April 1941 on the SS Nerissa, a Canadian troopship, that was sunk by a German U-boat off the coast of Ireland. When PWB wrote about an outbreak on the anniversary of last year's, he is referring to the May 30th movement, a series of labor strikes, anti-imperialist demonstrations, and boycotts targeting British and Japanese interests, which happened the year before, in 1925.
HMS Vindictive at Shanghai, April 15, 1926. Dear Brit, I suppose it will be weeks before I can expect any letters unless you have seen and noted my change of appointment. Damn it. The reason for the change, as I may have told you, is that the captain of the Moorhen wanted someone he knew with him, so got the Admiralty approval to get Agnew from this ship, as I had not asked for a gunboat. The disadvantages, as far as I am concerned, are obvious. The advantages are that by going north to Weihai Wei for the summer, we avoid the great heat, which would not agree with me, and that I shall see more of you in the winter. Is it in October that you expect to come out? Well, I have got a cabin to myself, right aft. It isn't palatial. There is only just sufficient deck space to do a few simple exercises, and they have to be done with caution. However, there is good accommodation for my gear, a desk, a scuttle, a fan, which works, an electric heater, a bookshelf, and other modern conveniences. And above all, it is a nook where I can retire and be private. It is a great deal. Also, there is scope for decoration sufficient to give the personal touch, which means so much. and I don't have to look at anyone else's ugly relatives or undressed young women. We are lying down the Wangpu River, well below the town, so I have not been ashore since I joined. It is too much of a sweat. I want to settle down, and I haven't much ready money, as heaven only knows when my whites will arrive from England, and I am having some made here. But at present we don't need them. There is nearly always a breeze up the river, and the days are cool while the nights are distinctly parky. Having kept some night watches, I know whereof I speak. Ordinarily, we only keep officer of the day during non-working hours, but in this anchorage we have to have an officer of the night for the night watches. The arrangement is, the OD takes over at 0745 so that the other chap can breakfast, and keeps watch till after quarters, going down for his meals when the hands go. After quarters he keeps OD until 10 p.m. when he has to keep the rest of the first on deck. He is relieved for the middle by one of the watchkeepers stand up off, and then keeps the morning from 0400 until the next OD takes over at 0745. Not a bad arrangement if it weren't for having to keep the middle, as thus you lose 2 nights' sleep out of 4 instead of only 1. However, you can bring a deck chair up and a book, and catch a drop of rest if you are lucky. The deck chair has official sanction, so you don't have to be furtive about it. I was going to put in 10 days in the transport as I taking charge of a draft. But the Watchkeepers Union registered a protest, so one of the Gosh 2.5 stripers is going instead.
In the previous passage, an officer named Agnew is mentioned. According to the Royal Navy list, there were several officers with that surname serving in the Royal Navy in the 1920s, and the specific Navy list for that year is unavailable, so it would be difficult to identify which Agnew this is. The term sub in the letter likely stands for sub-lieutenant, which was PWB's rank. The ASI was a Royal Air Force transport ship. Taking charge of a draft means overseeing a group of personnel while they were in transit. Watchkeepers Union is probably a slang term for the entire group of officers whose main and defining duty is standing watch. 2.5 stripers would have been lieutenant commanders. PWB was 2 levels below that, so he's saying he got outranked for the assignment. In an essay he called Notes for Vindictive Memories, PWB wrote that he later learned the full explanation for his diversion from the Moorhen to the Vindictive.
In the winter of 1925-26, I was on leave in Canada after having had a very good commission in a smart cruiser flagship in the Mediterranean. I noted casually one day a headline in the local rag, "Bolshoi ship of the British Navy." Underneath was a photograph of HMS Vindictive and a confused and rambling statement that there had been a communistic outbreak in the ship and had now acquired a reputation of being red. At the time I paid very little attention to it, for I had applied to go to China and in due course had received an appointment to HMS Moorhen, a gunboat on the West River. My passage across the Pacific was arranged in the Empress of Australia. One day out of Shanghai I received a wireless telegraphy message from the Royal Navy office there, stating that my appointment to the Moorhen had been cancelled and that I was to await the arrival of HMS Vindictive at Shanghai. As I learned subsequently, the sub of the Vindictive couldn't stand the ship, and as he was a friend of the captain of the Moorhen, he had got the latter to apply for him, and a station appointment had been made. The exchange was a good one. For him, it did not take long to discover that the reported Bolshevism was as greatly exaggerated as the reports of Mark Twain's death. But it was equally clear that she was a most unhappy ship. She had started badly by being delayed for months at home doing catapult trials, and being kept semi-attached to the Atlantic Fleet before being allowed to sail for China. The Bolshevism scare, which had arisen through some drunken liberty men singing the red flag in the drifter going off to the ship, had panicked the captain and the commander. The former subsequently left the ship, and the ship was offered, so we heard, to another captain who refused her, in spite of the very great scarcity of commands at that time. In the end, Captain H took her over.
In December 1925, several newspapers published sensationalist accounts of a supposed mutiny on HMS Vindictive. The song called The Red Flag was written in 1889 by an Irish activist during the London dock strike and is considered a socialist anthem. The incident turned out to be a drunken episode, and some of the news reports were later retracted. The Captain H mentioned was likely Ronald Howard, who is reported to have captained the Vindictive from August 1922 until February 1923 and then again from October 1925 until April 1927. In the interim, the Vindictive was captained by George Francis Hyde. While either of those could be Captain H, the timing indicates Brock was referring to Howard rather than Hyde.
HMS Vindictive at sea, Shanghai to Weihai Wei, April 27, 1926. Dear Brit, we left Shanghai yesterday. To turn in the narrow and crowded Wangpu River, we had to go up at slack water to a bend in the river, let go an anchor, and swing with the assistance of the first of the flood. All would have been well if the river were emptier, but the flood swept us down on a steamer at anchor and she had to veer clear. Then proceeding downstream, a steamer shoved off from the jetty without considering us, and the tide bore us over to her side and we scraped along her. All our boats were out and might have been crushed to matchwood, but they escaped with a few scratches. We got down to Wusung where the Wangpu joins the Yangtze about 1300, and then had to anchor and wait for the next flood tide before we could pass the ferry flats at the mouth of the river. Considering that the Yangtze brings down something like 1 million tons of mud per day, the wonder is that the entrance is not more silted up than it is. You can see the yellow color of the river water 80 or 100 miles out to sea. It is a 2 days trip to Weihai Wei. We arrive tomorrow just in time for my day on. Just my luck. Last day on in Shanghai, first day on in Weihai Wei. We ran into a fleet of junks during my morning watch. They had no lights until we were almost on them. Dashed idiots. Didn't collect any junks, but I'm not at all sure about their nets, however.
The primary base for the Royal Navy's China station was in Hong Kong. However, the British maintained a significant station in Shanghai to protect British interests and shipping on the Yangtze River. As a larger cruiser, Vindictive would have used one of the major anchorages on the Huangpu River rather than being docked. Ferry Flats was the English navigational name for the Tongsha Shoals, a massive sandbar in the Yangtze estuary and a notorious hazard for ships. HMS Vindictive was being sent to Weihai Wei, 796 nautical miles away, as part of the summer cruise. In the 1920s, the Royal Navy followed a strict seasonal migration in China to avoid the oppressive heat and disease risks, including malaria and cholera, prevalent in Hong Kong and Shanghai during the summer. Weihai Wei to the north was designated a health resort and training ground. The climate was cooler and healthier, and the large, shallow bay was perfect for gunnery practice and regattas. PWB sent another letter to his brother Brit after successfully arriving at Weihai Wei.
HMS Vindictive at Weihai Wei, 7th of May 1926. Dear Brit, many thanks for your letter which arrived with the others from the family. It is great to be in touch once more. I am perfectly content, particularly as we shall be here until the end of the month certainly, perhaps all summer. The greatest drawback is that the anchorage where we are is not altogether sheltered and a wind from the east makes things a bit difficult. I haven't been to the mainland yet. The district is governed by a British administrator. Theoretically, it ought to be returned to China, but the Chinese, probably owing to the lack of a strong established central government, have taken no steps about taking it over. The mainland is not very important except as a summer resort. The naval dockyard, a small one on the order of a Esquimalt, is on the island of Lukung Tau. There exist the remains of a fort and gun emplacements used by the Chinese against the Japs in 1894, and there are also some gun emplacements of ours but no guns. The principal buildings are a canteen, an hotel, a golf club, and the United Services Club. The latter used to be the Chinese Admiralty, and it is where Admiral Jing committed suicide after his defeat by the Japanese. It is about 5.5 miles around the island, so it is not large. We are working up for a full caliber shoot next week. We went out yesterday and did sub-caliber in the forenoon, fired 4 torpedoes, one at a time, Lord knows why, and flew off a seaplane and did not get in till dark. We were a bit late getting away as Bluebell, who was towing our target, very skillfully got the hawser round her screw and capsized the target.
Lukung Tau, also known as Lugung Island, was a small island at the mouth of Weihai Bay that was the official outpost for the Royal Navy from 1898 to 1930. HMS Bluebell was an Acacia-class sloop originally built in 1915 for the First World War. Acacia-class sloops were robust and possessed good range, making them ideal for colonial patrol in the Far East. Later that year, In November 1926, HMS Bluebell helped rescue the British steamer called the Sunning when it was hijacked by pirates. After the crew regained control of the ship, the pirates set fire to her. Bluebell spotted the burning ship and came to its rescue, scaring away the pirates and towing the Sunning to Hong Kong. Highlights of Canada Brock's career include being a Navy cadet at the Halifax explosion of 1917. A junior officer on HMS Vindictive at the China Station at the start of the Chinese Civil War in the 1920s. Torpedo officer in the Mediterranean during the 1930s. Royal Navy Admiralty staff at the start of the Second World War. Executive officer on HMS Mauritius at the Sicily and D-Day landings. Senior naval officer at Schleswig-Holstein in post-war Germany. Captain of the HMS Kenya during the Korean War. And flag officer for the Middle East in the 1950s. Forced into retirement in 1958, Rear Admiral Brock became a maritime historian, authoring many essays and co-authoring the book, Steam and Sail, in Britain and North America. But he never wrote his biography. Thankfully, some of his story survived in letters, essays, diaries, and photographs. Museums and archives offer a wealth of primary sources such as those featured in this audiogram. These materials provide a spotlight on historical events and social history not found elsewhere. Letters and diaries, particularly, offer personal insights into the past. The Canadian Passages Project hopes to make unique materials held by CFB Esquimalt Museum more accessible to audiences around the world. This audiogram was produced by K.M. Lowe in collaboration with CFB Esquimalt Naval and Military Museum, which, unless otherwise noted, holds all rights to the original materials. This content, including but not limited to recordings, commentary, and images, is protected by Canadian and international copyright laws. All rights are reserved. No part of this production may be reproduced, distributed, or transmitted without prior written permission from the copyright holder, but links to the official version may be shared. For more information on this project, please visit canadianpassages.ca. Thank you for listening. Please like and subscribe for more content like this.